Have you ever had a moment where life becomes so brutally honest that it stops pretending to love you? A moment so sharp, so humiliating, that it slices through every memory you thought would protect you. I used to believe that motherhood was a shield, that if you gave everything, you were safe from being discarded. But that illusion shattered on a night when the rain wouldn't stop, and my own son looked at me like I was a stranger stealing space in his doorway. The wind howled against the house like it was warning me, begging me to step back inside, but Paul didn't hear it or didn't care. His jaw was clenched, his eyes cold, and before I could even gather my breath to ask what was happening, he grabbed my suitcase, the same cheap floral one I'd used for years, and threw it so hard onto the porch that it bounced before rolling into the yard. The rain swallowed it eagerly, as if even the sky wanted to help erase me. "You're a burden, Mom," he said, and the word burden didn't come out like an accusation. It came out like a sentence. Isn't it strange how one word can unmake a lifetime? My slippers soaked instantly when I stepped outside, but I didn't reach for the suitcase right away. I just stood there, waiting for him to soften, waiting for something, an apology, a hesitation, a flicker of guilt. But the only sound was the door slamming behind me, a sound so final that it felt like it cracked the air. And maybe it cracked something inside me too. Have you ever felt a kind of silence so loud it drowns you? That was the quiet I walked into as I picked up my suitcase, its damp fabric clinging to my hands, and stepped onto the street without a destination, without dignity, without anything but the echo of that word. Burden pounding in my ribs. The rain didn't fall gently. It punished. It soaked my sweater until it clung to my skin like a reminder that comfort was something I no longer had a right to. I walked past houses glowing with warm lights, past families settling in for the night, past windows holding scenes of dinners and laughter I used to believe were permanent in my own life. Funny how security feels like air, utterly invisible until the moment it's taken from you. My steps became slower as the storm grew harder, but I couldn't stop because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering that my own child had chosen to erase me. I kept walking until my legs began to shake from cold and exhaustion. A bridge appeared ahead, its concrete underbelly dry enough to sit under, hidden enough that no one would notice a 72-year-old woman curling around a soaked suitcase like a makeshift pillow. I lowered myself to the ground carefully, every bone protesting. The air under the bridge tasted like rust and old water. Cars hissed past above me, their tires slicing through puddles, but no one slowed down, no one wondered about the shadow of a woman folded into the darkness. And strangely, that invisibility hurt more than the cold. Have you ever had the realization that you could vanish from the world and not one person would pause their evening? That night, as I clutched the thin blanket I found buried inside my suitcase, I felt myself slipping into a kind of stillness I'd never known, something between despair and surrender. I thought of the scraped knees I'd cleaned, the birthdays I'd saved up for, the nights I stayed awake nursing fevers while Paul slept curled against my chest. How do children forget those things? Or do they remember and simply decide they're no longer enough to justify your existence in their adult lives? The thought made my throat tighten, but I didn't cry. That's something people never tell you about deep heartbreak. Sometimes it's too heavy for tears. Instead, I listened to the rhythm of the rain, trying to match my breath to it, trying not to think about how morning would find me still here, invisible, unwanted, alone. It was sometime after 3 in the morning when the storm softened. The world felt quiet in a way that didn't comfort. It warned. My eyelids were heavy, my body shivering uncontrollably when I heard footsteps approaching. Not rushed, not hesitant, steady, intentional. The kind of footsteps that belonged to someone who knew exactly where they were going. My heart raced, fear gripping my spine, because who looks under a bridge at this hour? I pulled the blanket tighter, trying to make myself smaller, but the footsteps stopped directly in front of me. And then I heard my name, soft, disbelieving, cracked at the edges. Helen! For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. Maybe sleep had finally taken me into some cruel dream. But when I looked up, blinking away the rainwater and exhaustion, I saw her, Vivian, my sister. My brilliant, stubborn, infuriatingly successful sister whom I hadn't seen properly in nearly 20 years. Her hair was plastered to her cheeks, mascara streaked down her face, and her expression, God, her expression, was something between heartbreak and fury. Not at me, but for me. Vivian didn't speak at first. She knelt down, brushing the wet strands from my forehead with hands that shook, not from cold, but from the shock of seeing her older sister like this. Then she wrapped her coat around my shoulders as though she could warm the months of hurt inside me. And in that moment, under that bridge, something shifted, a crack in the darkness, a pulse of possibility. She lifted me to my feet, grabbed my suitcase, and guided me toward her rental car without a single question. No judgment, no lecture, just action, just love disguised as urgency. I sat in her car, wrapped in her coat, drinking the warm tea she pressed into my hands and felt safe. Maybe for the first time in years. And yet, as the car pulled away from the bridge, one chilling thought lodged itself into my mind. A thought that whispered louder than the rain. Why did Vivian find me tonight, of all nights? As if she knew exactly where I'd be. What if my rescue didn't begin with luck, but with a secret that had been waiting to surface? Have you ever wondered why certain people show up at the exact moment your world collapses, almost as if they weren't summoned by chance, but by something heavier, something deliberate? That question stalked me from the second Vivian's car pulled away from the bridge and the storm-soaked version of me I was leaving behind. She didn't speak at first. She only adjusted the heater, wrapped her coat tighter around my shaking shoulders, and kept glancing over like she was afraid I might disappear if she blinked. The warmth from the tea seeped into my palms, but it wasn't the heat that steadied me. It was the unfamiliar sense of being cared for without being questioned. When we finally reached the motel, the neon vacancy sign flickering like a tired heartbeat, Vivian placed her hand lightly on my back, guiding me inside as though I was breakable. Maybe I was. Have you ever been helped so gently that it almost hurts more than the harm you endured? That's how her touch felt, like she saw every fracture I'd worked hard to pretend wasn't there. The motel clerk didn't ask why 2 drenched women were checking in before dawn. He barely looked up from his form. Vivian handled everything: payment, room key, even carrying my soggy suitcase as if the weight of it offended her. And once we stepped inside the room, with its humming air conditioner and its faint smell of bleach and old carpet, she simply said, "Take a shower, Helen," in a voice so soft it nearly unraveled me. Under the hot water, I watched mud, rain, and humiliation swirl down the drain, and I wondered if dignity was something that could return once washed away. When I stepped out, wrapped in a towel that smelled of detergent instead of mildew, Vivian had laid out a set of clean clothes on the bed. Her clothes, clearly expensive, but chosen without a hint of show-off intent. She didn't pry, didn't force conversation, didn't demand an explanation. Instead, she sat there, legs crossed, fingers tapping her chin in that old habit of hers that meant she was thinking too hard. Morning light leaked into the room as if it wasn't sure it was welcome. I expected awkwardness, maybe pity, maybe a dozen questions beginning with, "Why didn't you call me?" But Vivian didn't ask any of them. Instead, she placed a thermos of fresh coffee in front of me and a folder I hadn't noticed before. That folder, plain, crisp, too official looking for a casual visit, made something inside my chest tighten. Have you ever sensed a turning point before you understood it? She slid it toward me slowly, like she knew the contents would change the air we were breathing. "Helen," she said, with a steadiness that contrasted sharply with the tremble of my hands, "we're going to Florida today. I already arranged everything." Florida? I blinked at her, confused. Vivian didn't blink back. She rarely did. She was always decisive, even in childhood, the kind of person who didn't ask permission to act, she simply acted. She reached into the folder and pulled out a sheet of paper, then handed it to me. My name, my full name, was printed at the top in bold letters. Below it, property deed. Clearwater, Florida. A fully furnished condo, ocean view, 2 bedrooms, under my name. My breath snagged. Before I could speak, she placed a second paper over it. Bank account summary. The number at the bottom seemed unreal, almost comical in its excess. $5 million. "Your savings," Vivian said quietly, as if reading the shock on my face. "I've been putting money aside for years. I didn't want you to know unless you needed it." Needed it. Those words stung because only someone who had seen my life from a distance could know how long I had been pretending I didn't need anything. "Why?" I whispered. She didn't hesitate. "Because I knew you'd never ask for help. And because I saw signs long before you admitted your son was capable of this." My throat tightened as embarrassment and gratitude twisted together. Had she been watching me struggle all this time? Had she seen the decline, the neglect, the emotional erosion? How long had she known something was wrong? Her eyes softened. "I got a message," she finally added, "from someone who lives near Paul's Street. They saw you crying outside weeks ago. I didn't want to interfere unless it got worse." A pause. "Last night it got worse." We were back on the road within an hour. Vivian drove as if the highway had wronged her personally. The sun climbed higher, warming the car windows, and for the first time in months, I felt warmth that wasn't from a blanket or forced endurance. It was safety. But with safety came fear I didn't know how to name. Have you ever been given so much kindness that it terrifies you? The thought of owning a condo, my condo, and having money that couldn't be taken from me left me dizzy. Freedom, I realized, is heavier than captivity. It requires you to believe you deserve it. As we crossed into Florida, palm trees lining the road like a quiet welcome committee, Vivian reached into her bag and handed me a small envelope. Inside was a key, simple, silver, ordinary looking, but it might as well have been a crown. "This is yours," she said. "No one can touch it. No one can take it. You're safe now." But even as she said it, something inside me whispered a warning, because safety, once acquired, becomes something others want to steal. And there were people who believed they still owned me in ways that went deeper than money. People who saw my suffering not with guilt, but with opportunity. As we approached Clearwater, the sight of the ocean stretched endlessly beside us, blue, calm, indifferent to human chaos. My heart began to settle, but only for a moment, because deep down I knew storms don't end just because you step into sunlight. They often follow, waiting for a chance to strike again. And somewhere far behind us, in the house where I had been discarded like worn-out furniture, two people would soon discover that I hadn't disappeared quietly into the night. I had been rescued, and worse, I had been empowered. And nothing attracts the greedy faster than someone they once controlled suddenly rising beyond their reach. Have you ever stepped into a place so peaceful that it made you suspicious, like the calm was too perfect to last? That was my first thought when Vivian unlocked the door to the Clearwater condo, and light came pouring in like forgiveness itself. The walls were warm beige, the furniture soft gray. The ocean stretched beyond the balcony like a promise I didn't yet know how to trust. But even beauty can feel dangerous when you've just survived humiliation. I walked through each room slowly, afraid to touch anything, afraid it might vanish if I blinked too long. How do you accept luxury when yesterday you were sitting under a bridge, soaked, shivering, invisible? Vivian placed my suitcase beside the guest room bed and said, "This is yours now," with such finality that it almost scared me. Ownership wasn't something I was used to anymore. Not of space, not of safety, not even of my own story. Still, I nodded because hope, even shaky hope, felt better than emptiness. For the next few days, life shifted into something almost serene. I woke to the sound of waves, not sirens or slammed doors. I made coffee in a kitchen that wasn't hostile. I took slow walks down the hallway without worrying about who might yell at me for existing. The neighbors greeted me with warm smiles, offering little snippets of their lives. Widows who found comfort in routine, retirees who traded their careers for sunrises, people who had learned how to start again. Their kindness felt real, but a strange unease lingered beneath my ribs. Have you ever felt shadows even in the brightest room? That was the feeling, like something familiar and dangerous was waiting just outside the frame. It started small, the first hint that my past wasn't finished with me. One afternoon, as I returned from a walk by the water, the building's security guard, Ramirez, approached me with a concerned tilt to his head. He looked like a man who had spent decades reading people before trouble started. "Ma'am," he said gently, "we had a report of someone hanging around the mailboxes last night. Didn't match any residents." His voice held that careful tone people use when delivering news they know might shake you. "Just keep an eye out," he added. I smiled politely, thanked him, pretended it didn't bother me. But the second I stepped back into my condo and locked the door, a cold shiver crawled up my spine. Who was watching, and why? I told myself it was nothing, just a coincidence, a stranger passing through. But survival teaches you how to read patterns. And the pattern felt familiar. Too familiar. The next evening, Vivian hosted a small gathering in the clubhouse, a gentle, neighborly way to introduce me to the community. Soft music played in the background, the ocean glowed through the glass windows, and for the first time in months, I felt like a person instead of a discarded problem. People asked about my hobbies, not my usefulness. They asked if I liked the area, not if I needed anything. And then, just when I began letting my guard down, the air shifted. Have you ever felt the temperature in a room drop before danger even enters? I turned toward the door and saw them, Paul and Myrissa, standing in the doorway as if they belonged there. My heart didn't pound. It clenched like it recognized an old predator. Paul's shirt was neatly ironed, his smile too wide, too confident, as if he'd rehearsed this entrance. Marissa wore beige and gold, perfectly polished, but her eyes flickered with the same sharp calculation I knew too well. They were dressed like guests, but they looked at me like I was a vault. Vivian got to them before they took another step. I couldn't hear her words, but I saw the posture, the wall she became. Paul's smile faltered. Marissa's hand tightened around her handbag. They weren't invited. They weren't welcome. They knew it and pretended otherwise. And yet, their eyes kept darting toward me, studying, measuring, searching for cracks. I felt the weight of their gaze like a stain. Have you ever seen someone look at you not with love or anger, but with entitlement? That's what their eyes said. How dare you live well without us knowing? How dare you slip out of our control? Security escorted them out quietly, but the damage was already done. The room resumed its chatter, but I no longer heard the conversations, the laughter, the soft music. All I heard was the echo of the door closing behind them, a reminder that escaping was never enough. Some people chase you not because they love you, but because they feel ownership over the life you're trying to rebuild. That night back in my condo, I sat on the couch replaying every second of their appearance. They didn't come because they missed me. They didn't come because they were sorry. They came to evaluate, to assess the opportunity, to confirm that their discarded burden had landed somewhere comfortable and profitable. My phone buzzed with a message from Vivian. "They won't stop here." And she was right. When you strip entitlement from someone, they don't disappear, they evolve. They adjust their strategy. They wait for a softer route, a quieter opening, a more believable lie. The next morning, I found a small white envelope taped to my door. No name, no handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, blank, completely blank. Was it a threat? A message? A warning? Or worse, a test to see if I'd react? I didn't tell Vivian immediately. I needed a moment to decide whether fear would rule me again. I refused. I slid the paper into a drawer and went on with my day, even if my steps were a little too careful, my breaths a little too intentional. But deep inside, something had changed. Safety wasn't a feeling anymore. It was a discipline, a vigilance, a readiness. Because once people discover you've risen, they don't congratulate you. They calculate you. And Paul wasn't done calculating, because the next time he returned, he wouldn't bring an unexpected visit, he would bring a plan. Have you ever noticed how some apologies taste sweet at first, but leave a bitterness that won't wash away? The kind of sweetness that makes your instincts whisper, "This isn't kindness, this is bait." That's exactly how it felt when Paul showed up at my door 2 days after the clubhouse incident. Holding a box of pastries from the overpriced bakery he always refused to buy from when I lived under his roof. His smile was soft, too soft, the kind strangers give to children or customers, not to the mother they tossed into a storm. "I just wanted to check on you," he said, his eyes scanning the condo behind me, absorbing every detail. The marble counters, the clean floors, the air of stability that clung to the place. I didn't step aside to let him in. I simply nodded, and he took that as an invitation to continue speaking. Have you ever watched someone strategize behind their own eyes? That's what I saw, no remorse, just recalculations. "We were worried," he added, with a sincerity so practiced it almost sounded real. Almost. He left the pastries at my doorstep and walked away with the posture of a man who expected gratitude to follow him like a shadow. Gratitude did not follow. The next day, Marissa appeared, wearing a pastel dress and carrying a grocery bag filled with items I used to buy when I lived with them. Cheap brands, chosen not out of care but control. She spoke gently, too gently, calling me Mom, a title she had weaponized in the past. "Let me help," she said. "You shouldn't have to do everything alone at your age." At my age, the phrase dangled in the air like a hook. I didn't bite. I didn't let her inside either. She forced a smile anyway, as though her voice alone could soften the ugliness beneath her intentions. When she left, her perfume lingered like a warning. But the real storm began when their visits switched from awkwardly sweet to intentionally sentimental. One morning, a framed photo appeared on my doorstep. Paul as a little boy sitting next to me on a pier. Both of us smiling at something the camera didn't capture. The message attached read, "For your new home. Love, P. Love." Funny how people reach for nostalgia when manipulation doesn't work fast enough. Each gesture became more polished, more emotionally calculated. Soup left in glass jars. Flowers in colors they knew I loved. Calls that rang only once before hanging up. Even notes slipped under my door, handwritten, dripping with remorse. But real remorse is raw, messy, humbled. This was scripted. And in the quiet moments between their gestures, I felt a cold clarity settle inside me. They weren't apologizing, they were circling, testing, waiting for the moment I'd soften enough to let them in. Vivian, ever the strategist, noticed before I confessed what was happening. One evening, she arrived with a small black device, a recorder disguised as an ordinary key fob. "Keep this by the door," she said. "Turn it on when they show up. Let them talk. People reveal their true motives when they think you're still vulnerable." Vulnerable. The word used to sting. Now it lit a fire in me. And just as Vivian predicted, the sweetness didn't last. Manipulators grow impatient when kindness doesn't grant access. Their mask begins to slip. The visits became more frequent, the smiles stiffer, the tone subtly urgent. Paul arrived one afternoon holding a tin of cookies. Homemade, he claimed, though I knew he barely knew how to boil water. "Mom," he said, leaning in just a little too close, "I brought something for you to look at." That sentence, the universal prelude to deceit, made every muscle in my body tense. He pulled a stapled packet from his briefcase and placed it on my table. "It's just a simple form," he said. "Family wellness and property coordination, so we can help you with things. You know, medical decisions, bills, emergencies." Emergencies. Another hook. Another lie. I lifted the first page. The formatting was clean, the language professional, but buried in the middle, like a snake coiled beneath leaves, was a clause granting him temporary power of attorney. Another clause gave him access to financial accounts for oversight. Oversight. People choose fancy words when they want to hide ugly intentions. My silence must have fooled him, because he smiled, relaxed, even reached for my shoulder with a faux gentle touch that made my skin crawl. But then Vivian stepped into the room. She had been sitting quietly by the window the entire time, pretending to read. When she stood, the air shifted. Vivian isn't loud when she's angry, she becomes precise, dangerous in her clarity. "Interesting," she said, lifting the papers with two fingers as if afraid they'd stain her. "Especially since this is identical to the draft you emailed last week to that paralegal in Cincinnati." Paul's face drained. What are you talking about?" he stammered. Vivian didn't blink. "I have the screenshot and the timestamp." Silence spread across the room like frost. Myrissa, who had been lingering near the doorway pretending to browse her phone, froze. Vivian nodded to me, a signal. I turned on the recorder beneath the table and watched the panic bloom behind their eyes. Why would you try to take control of her finances? Vivian asked, her tone smooth as polished steel. Why would you pretend it's about care? Why would you forge language meant for the elderly and vulnerable? Paul rose from his seat too fast, his chair scraping the floor. You're twisting things, he snapped. We're only trying to help. You're the one poisoning her against us. Poison. The irony made my chest tighten with something close to laughter. Because poison was exactly what they'd brought, sweetened, disguised, served warm with tears. I didn't raise my voice. I simply picked up the document and tore it down the middle. The ripping sound echoed through the room, clean, final, liberating. Paul's eyes went wide with something he hadn't felt toward me in decades. Fear. This, I said quietly, is what happens when you mistake my silence for weakness. Myrissa reached toward Paul, urging him to leave, but he stood there trembling with a rage he didn't dare unleash in front of Vivian. When they finally walked out, the forced politeness they'd hidden behind crumbled completely. The door shut behind them with a thud that vibrated through my bones. And yet, deep inside, I knew people like them don't stop when confronted, they escalate. Because when honey fails to lure its prey, poison sharpens. And their next move would be far more dangerous. Have you ever realized that some battles aren't fought with fists or shouting? They're fought in paperwork, in whispers, in the shadows of systems built to protect you yet easily twisted to destroy you. That's what the days following the torn contract felt like. Not peace, not victory, but the uneasy quiet before someone decides to change tactics. And Paul did, almost immediately. It began with the small things. A man in a collared shirt and carrying a clipboard knocked on my door, smiling with the oily charm of someone pretending to be official. I'm here for your estate wellness review, he said. Estate wellness. What a strange combination of words, like someone had merged legal jargon with a threat. When I told him I had my own legal team, he stiffened, wished me a good day, and left far too quickly for someone supposedly acting on protocol. Vivian arrived 20 minutes later, her expression unreadable, the way it always got when she was trying not to let rage interfere with strategy. They're testing new entry points, she said calmly, though the calm was only an outer shell. If they can't charm you and they can't trick you into signing, they'll try a different path, one that doesn't require your consent. A chill crawled up my spine. Different path? I asked. She nodded. They'll try to make it look like you're not capable of managing things. Capable. Such a simple word, yet it carries the power to define a person's fate once they are older. People love pretending concern while tightening the noose. 3 days later, an alert pinged on Vivian's phone, an automated system she'd set up with the probate office. Someone had attempted to submit an inquiry about conservatorship guidelines. Not a filing, just a preliminary inquiry, but enough to show intention. Enough to show they were preparing a new attack. That same night, the fire alarm in my hallway blared at 2 in the morning, jolting me from sleep. Heart pounding, I stepped into the hallway with the other residents. No smoke, no fire, just chaos and confusion. Ramirez checked the cameras the next morning, and there he was, a blurry figure in the service corridor, wearing a jacket identical to the one Paul had worn to the clubhouse party. Not conclusive evidence, but enough to ignite fear inside my chest. Fear, however, is a dangerous thing. It can paralyze you, or it can turn you into something sharper. Vivian and Grace refused to let it paralyze me. They adjusted the locks, set up digital alerts for every account, and created a private log. Every knock, every envelope, every interaction documented with time-stamped precision. "Paper beats lies," Grace said, tapping the notebook. "And you, Helen, have more truth than they have strategy." Her confidence steadied me in ways I hadn't expected. For years, I had been told, explicitly or implicitly, that my words mattered less, my perception weaker, my judgment flawed. But seeing two powerful women treating my accounts, my home, and my safety like they were worth fighting for, it made me breathe easier, even when everything else tightened around me. But when manipulation fails, desperation takes the wheel. Paul's next move wasn't subtle. Mail that wasn't mine appeared in my box, ads for memory care services, pamphlets titled "When Your Loved One Stops Managing Life," even a brochure for an assisted living facility located suspiciously close to Paul's neighborhood. Someone had filled out my information on online forms, marking me as interested. Interested. The word made me laugh, a dry, humorless sound, because if there was one thing I wasn't interested in, it was being erased. Then came the phone messages. First, a nurse who claimed I had scheduled a cognitive wellness call. Then, a financial advisor confirming an adjustment to beneficiary listings. Then, a pharmacy saying they had received a request for my medication profile. None of which I initiated. None of which were mistakes. They were creating a digital trail designed to paint me as confused, unwell, incapable. Not once did they openly accuse me of mental decline. No, they were far too strategic for that. Instead, they tried to push me into the margins of credibility, the subtle space where doubt festers. But here's the thing about aging: your memory sharpens where trauma sits. And I remembered everything, every cold word, every slammed door, every attempt to make me small, every moment of being dismissed, and now every move they made to dismantle my autonomy. So I did something they didn't expect. I went on the offensive quietly, silently, methodically. I called my doctor myself and scheduled a full physical and cognitive exam. When the results came back, clear, sharp, normal, I copied them 3 times, storing them like ammunition. Grace filed a precautionary record with the state, ensuring any future attempt to claim I was mentally compromised would be cross-checked with my medical evaluations. Vivian reinforced my digital identity with biometric safeguards, making it nearly impossible for anyone to impersonate me online. Every time they tried to move against me, we moved twice as fast. But just when I thought the worst was behind us, something arrived that proved Paul and Marissa still had layers of deceit to peel back. A white envelope, clean, stiff, impersonal, slid under my door one morning with no return address. Inside were 6 pages of legal language accusing me of irresponsible spending, erratic decisions, emotional instability, and here was the dagger: potential endangerment of self. They had escalated to formal action. They had declared war. The silence that followed the reading of that document was unlike any silence I had ever felt. Not lonely, not fragile, focused, razor-sharp, because this wasn't just an attack on my finances, it was an attack on my identity, my competence, my autonomy. They were trying to build a narrative where I was no longer the woman who raised them, but a woman who needed rescuing from her own life. And if that narrative stuck, everything Vivian had gifted me, freedom, dignity, security, could crumble under the weight of a single court order. But what Paul didn't know was that the trap he set for me was already snapping shut around him. And the evidence waiting to surface would turn his quiet war into his loud downfall. Have you ever watched someone dig a hole for you so confidently, so certain you'll fall into it, that they never notice they're the ones stepping backward toward the edge? That's exactly what Paul and Marissa were doing. And by the time part 6 of this war began, the ground beneath them was already crumbling. When Vivian burst into my condo with a folder under her arm and a look that meant business, I braced myself. "They filed it," she said, short, clipped, furious. By it, she meant a conservatorship claim, dressed up as concern but dripping with fraud. They claimed I was erratic, mentally declining, financially reckless. They even attached statements, fabricated, polished, dripping with strategic half-truths, meant to convince a judge I needed guardianship. Guardianship. Me. The same me who had survived storms they never even noticed because they were too busy taking from me to see what I was enduring. But Vivian wasn't rattled. She looked almost excited, the way a lion looks when it's finally given permission to pounce. "They made mistakes," she said. "Big ones." That's when Grace arrived, clicking her pen like she was preparing to carve their lies into admissible confessions. She spread documents across my kitchen counter, screenshots, email headers, forged signatures with mismatched pressure points, even metadata proving the files were edited on a closed-down cafe's Wi-Fi network. Have you ever realized your enemies were far sloppier than they pretended? Grace slid one paper toward me, a side-by-side of Paul's forged signature and the real notary stamp he'd copied. "He didn't even rotate the seal properly," she said. "He's arrogant, not clever." The hearing date was set. Fast. Faster than any of us expected, almost as if fate wanted the truth exposed before Paul had time to rewrite his next lie. The morning of the hearing, I dressed in a navy suit I hadn't worn in years, not to impress, but to remind myself of the woman I used to be before life reduced me to pleading for scraps of kindness. Vivian drove, her fingers drumming the wheel with controlled fury. Grace sat in the back with 3 folders, each thick enough to crush a reputation. When we walked into the courthouse, people stared, maybe at my age, maybe at my posture, maybe because they could sense something powerful simmering beneath the surface. And then I saw him, Paul, sitting 3 rows ahead, shoulders stiff, leg bouncing in nervous repetition. Marissa beside him, pretending composure, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles whitened. Neither of them turned. Neither dared. The judge entered, and the room settled with the sharpness of a held breath. The proceedings began almost immediately. Their lawyer, young, overeager, dangerously confident, painted a picture of me as a fragile woman being manipulated by outside influences, meaning Vivian, and making financially chaotic decisions. He used words like safety, concern, stability, disguising control as compassion. But compassion doesn't tremble under pressure, and he was trembling. Then it was Grace's turn. Grace didn't raise her voice. She didn't show anger. She wielded truth like a scalpel. She presented timestamps proving the documents were forged. She presented statements from the notary, who affirmed he never met me. She showed the court the photos of the closed cafe where they pretended I had signed papers. She played the recordings, Paul's own voice hinting at paperwork, access, helping me manage things. And finally, she presented my medical evaluations, Clean, strong, undeniable. Have you ever seen a lie deflate like a punctured balloon? That's what happened to Paul's face. His lawyer fumbled, stammered, shuffled papers as if the answer might appear between the lines. But the answer was already clear. They had overplayed their hand. The judge's questions sliced through their excuses. Why does your timeline contradict itself? Why does your language match a template for elder exploitation cases? Why are your witnesses non-existent? Why did you request beneficiary changes without authorization? And then the final blow. Why did you attempt to file conservatorship without any medical evidence? Paul opened his mouth, but the judge raised a hand, silencing him with a gesture people reserve for unruly children. During a short recess, I stepped outside. The sun hit my face, warm and brilliant, so different from the storm Paul threw me into months ago. I stood on the courthouse steps, letting the heat sink into my bones, letting the truth settle. And then I heard footsteps behind me. "Mom!" His voice, soft, fragile, uncertain. I didn't turn, not yet. "You're really doing this?" he asked. Not an apology, not accountability, a complaint. As if I were the villain for defending myself. I finally turned, meeting his eyes. He looked smaller than I remembered, as though his lies had carved pieces out of him. "No," I said softly. "I'm not doing anything to you. You did this." He swallowed, guilt flickering like a dying light bulb. "I didn't think it would go this far," he muttered. I shook my head. "Lines don't move just because you regret stepping over them." We returned to the courtroom. The judge delivered the decision swiftly, almost mercifully. The conservatorship claim was dismissed. The forged documents were referred for criminal investigation. The foundation's protections were upheld and strengthened. My autonomy was affirmed. Their attempt had not only failed, it had exposed every greed-soaked tactic they thought they'd buried. When the gavel fell, the sound wasn't sharp. It was final. That night on Vivian's balcony, the ocean whispered its endless rhythm while we sat quietly, me, Vivian, and Grace, sharing peach pie and letting the victory sink in. Not triumph, not gloating, just relief, just truth. Because some wins aren't loud, they're exhaled. But the most surprising part wasn't that I won. It was what their downfall unlocked next. Something I never expected. Something that would change not just my life, but the lives of countless women like me. Have you ever reached the end of a storm only to realize the calm waiting for you isn't silence? It's power. Not the loud, triumphant kind, but the quiet kind that fills your lungs and reminds you that survival itself can be an act of rebellion. That's what the days following the courtroom victory felt like. Not celebration, not revenge, something deeper, something steadier, something earned. I would wake before sunrise, step onto my balcony with a mug of tea, and let the ocean's breath meet mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for footsteps, for shouting, for papers shoved in my face disguised as family concern. Instead, I was met with the soft pulse of waves and the reassuring knowledge that the worst they could do had already failed. Vivian called me the morning after the verdict, her voice lighter than I'd heard it in decades. "The county prosecutor's office is moving forward," she said. 3 charges. Fraud, forgery, attempted misappropriation of nonprofit assets. Heavy words, sharp consequences. I waited for guilt to rise in me, for the motherly instinct to shield Paul from what he'd brought upon himself. But guilt never came. Only clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives when you stop rewriting someone's intentions and finally read them for what they are. Meanwhile, Marissa vanished from the community like smoke. Grace saw her packing boxes behind the old bakery, moving with the frantic energy of someone fleeing shame before it hardens into consequences. I didn't chase her. I didn't chase either of them. I simply let their distance become permanent. In that quiet space, I found something unexpected. Not grief, not anger, but purpose. Real purpose. The foundation Vivian helped me build, the one they tried so desperately to hijack, became more than legal armor. It became a mission, a restoration, a promise to women like me who had been ridiculed, dismissed, belittled, or emotionally starved by those who were supposed to protect them. I visited the Foundation's new office, smaller than the previous space, but buzzing with life. Volunteers painting walls in sage green, elderly women dropping in for free workshops, a young social worker explaining how to secure assets before manipulative relatives could claim them. A woman named Lyanna hugged me with a sincerity that radiated from her bones. "You saved this place," she whispered, but I shook my head. "No," I said. "I just refused to let it be stolen." And that was the truth. My rescue had begun as survival, but now it was becoming something larger. A lighthouse for those still caught in storms they didn't know how to escape. Later that day, I returned home with a box of old photographs Grace had recovered from a storage unit Paul once managed. I wasn't sure I wanted to open it, but healing isn't always soft. Sometimes it requires looking directly at what once hurt. The first photo was my wedding day, Charles standing tall beside me, his arm warm across my shoulders. Then Paul as a toddler, clinging to my leg, his cheeks rosy from laughter. Those images didn't break me. They reminded me that love had existed, and it had been real once. The pain came later, carved slowly, disguised as normalcy. That realization didn't hurt, it freed me. That night I wrote a letter not to Paul or Marissa, but to the woman I used to be. I wrote, I did not break. Even when they tried to erase me, I stayed. And at the bottom I added, and I will not disappear, as if sealing a pact with myself. The next morning, as I stood by the mailbox, an older neighbor approached me with a gentle smile. "I read the article," he said. "What you did, that took courage." I thanked him, but inside I didn't feel courageous. I just felt awake, more awake than I had been in decades. After he left, I retrieved my mail, flyers, bills, an invitation to speak at a women's center. Me speaking. The idea frightened me more than any confrontation Paul had staged, but fear wasn't my enemy anymore. Silence was. Later that week, Vivian and I secured the final legal piece of the foundation, an irrevocable protection clause ensuring that if anything ever happened to me, the assets would move directly into charitable programs. No loopholes, no relatives, no claims, no signatures to forge. A wall of legality so fortified that even the most determined manipulator couldn't chip it. When Grace signed the paperwork with me, she smiled. "You've sealed every door," she said. "Let them try to knock. No one's getting inside." And then, as if the universe wanted to test the strength I'd gained, Olivia appeared at my door. Holding a bouquet of convenience store flowers, her expression trembling between remorse and desperation. "I didn't know Paul filed again," she said. "He's falling apart, losing clients, not eating. He blames me." I listened. Not with sympathy. Sympathy had been drained long ago, but with recognition. Manipulation can wear many faces: cruelty, charm, guilt, helplessness. We just want to move forward, she continued. If there's anything we need to sign to show support. But I cut her off. Not sharply, not cruelly, just firmly. This life, I said, gesturing to the condo, to the peace surrounding us, I built without you, without him. I survived what you both threw at me, and I survived in silence for too long. Her eyes filled, but I didn't offer comfort. That's not my burden anymore, I added. She left with the flowers still in her hands. That night, I opened my windows. The breeze carried the smell of salt and jasmine, wrapping around me like a blessing. I lay in bed and felt, for the first time, not like I had escaped something, but like I had stepped into who I was always meant to become. Not a burden, not a victim, not a woman waiting for rescue, but a force of quiet, determined strength. A woman who rose from the bridge not with rage, but with purpose. Have you ever realized your story didn't end at survival? It began there. Because mine did. And now the legacy they tried to steal has become untouchable. And so have I. Have you ever thought you'd reached the end of a battle, only to discover that survival has an echo? One that keeps vibrating through your life long after the storm has passed. That's what the weeks following the Foundation's relaunch felt like. I thought I had closed the chapter neatly, sealed the doors they once pushed through, and built a life rooted in strength rather than fear. But healing isn't a straight line, it's a spiral. It circles back, digs deeper, tests your footing. And sometimes, it brings new faces into your world who unknowingly carry pieces of the pain you thought was uniquely yours. That became clear the day I walked into the Foundation's community room and saw 3 women huddled around a table, whispering about financial documents they didn't understand and relatives who were circling like vultures. Their fear was the same age-old fear. What happens when the people you love try to take the life you built? Hearing their stories cracked something open in me, not a wound, but a responsibility. I realized I wasn't just running a foundation anymore. I was holding a lantern in a room full of women who had been forced into the dark. And once you hold light, you cannot, in good conscience, dim it again. Vivian saw the shift in me instantly. "You're not hiding anymore," she said one morning as we sorted through case files. "You're leading." And maybe she was right. Maybe that was the part of myself I had abandoned long before Paul ever pushed me out of his home. But with leadership comes scrutiny, and scrutiny attracts people who believe they can bend your newfound authority into an opportunity. That was what brought a journalist named Corrine to my doorstep, a sharp-eyed woman with a notebook full of questions and a voice that sounded like it had cut through hundreds of lies before breakfast. "I want to write about what happened to you," she said. My instinct was to recoil. My story had already been twisted by those closest to me. Why would I hand it to a stranger? But then she added, "Not the scandal, the systemic issue. The way older women are targeted. Your experience could force real change." Real change. That phrase didn't feel like flattery, it felt like a door. After hours of hesitation, I agreed. Over tea, I began telling her the truth. Not the dramatic version, not the victimized version, but the quiet version. The bridge, the rain, the bargain I didn't know I was walking away from, and the long, steady reclaiming of myself. Corrine wrote in silence, nodding when my voice shook, pausing when she sensed I needed to breathe. When she left, she said, "Your story will help someone leave sooner." That sentence stayed with me long after she was gone. But not all attention is benevolent. A week after the interview, I received a letter, thick, official-looking, stamped with a firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a request for financial records, supposedly from a compliance audit tied to philanthropic regulation. The language was formal, intimidating, designed to unsettle. But there was something off, something in the phrasing that felt too familiar. I forwarded it to Grace, who reviewed it within minutes. "It's fake," she said. No hesitation. "Someone is phishing." Phishing. The word chilled me. Who would try to probe the foundation now? Who still believed they could insert themselves into my life through a loophole? Grace traced the letter's digital footprint, and while she couldn't link it directly to Paul or Marissa, the origin pointed to a private third-party investigator hired recently by an anonymous client. Anonymous, yes, but not invisible. Someone still wanted access to my world. Someone wasn't finished. When I shared this with Vivian, she sighed, the kind of sigh that carries both anger and exhaustion. "This is the price of visibility," she said. "Your story is out there now. Some will try to use it. Some will try to twist it. Some will try to silence it." Silence. That word again. The word that had once defined the darkest stretch of my life. I wouldn't let it return. Grace arrived that evening after a single text from Vivian, urgent. She read the letter again, listened to the recording of his short phone call, and then asked a question I hadn't dared consider. What if he didn't leave by choice? I blinked. "Grace, he walked away." She crossed her arms. "Did he, or did someone give him a reason to disappear? Debt collectors, criminal involvement, blackmail? You said he changed his name. People don't do that because they need space. They do it because they're hiding." The room seemed to sharpen around me. A chilling possibility slithered into my mind. What if the story I told Paul for years wasn't just a lie I crafted, but one Charles crafted for me? "There's another angle," Grace added carefully. "Why come back now, after the lawsuit, after the articles, after your foundation became public?" The implication hung in the air. My life had value now, visibility, credibility, purpose. And men like Charles were experts at returning only when they believed the person they abandoned had something they could use. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked to the balcony and stared at the waves as they folded over themselves endlessly. The ocean has a way of reminding you how small your past becomes when placed beside something vast and indifferent. I asked myself the hardest question: what do I owe to someone who once owed me everything? The answer was simple: nothing. But answers and closure aren't the same thing. So the next morning, I wrote another letter to him, short, firm, direct. "If you want to speak, we will do so in a public place with my sister present and nothing more. No surprise visits, no unscheduled contact, no rewriting history." Vivian delivered it herself to the Baton Rouge return address. She said the apartment complex looked run down, hidden behind a pawn shop, the kind of place people go when they're living a life made of consequences. "He didn't look well," she said. "But don't let that fool you. Weakness can be a strategy." A week passed. Then another envelope arrived. Inside was a location, an old cafe halfway between Clearwater and Baton Rouge, and a time. Nothing else. No explanations. No emotion. No signature, just initials. CM. I showed it to Grace, who ran a background check on the cafe. It closed 5 years ago. The meeting wouldn't be private, it would be exposed, vulnerable, unexpectedly strategic. "He doesn't want witnesses," Grace said. "He wants deniability." Something in my gut twisted, not in fear but in recognition. This wasn't a man seeking forgiveness. This was a man seeking leverage. But leverage for what? 2 mornings later, Vivian drove me toward the meeting point, her hands gripping the wheel hard enough to whiten her knuckles. "You don't need to do this," she said for the 4th time. "Closure is not a debt." I rested my hand on hers. "I'm not going for him, I'm going for me." When we arrived, the cafe's faded sign hung crooked, its windows dusty, its parking lot cracked from sun exposure. A single figure stood near the entrance. Thin, graying, slouched as if life had bent him in places I once believed were unbreakable. Charles. He lifted his head when he heard the car door open. His eyes widened, not with joy, not with regret, but with the startling recognition that the woman walking toward him was not the wife he abandoned. She was someone rebuilt, someone rewritten, someone he could not manipulate with the familiarity of old wounds. He opened his mouth to speak, and that's when I noticed something he hadn't planned for me to see. A bruise, faded but unmistakable, on his jaw. And that bruise told me one terrifying truth. The danger coming for me wasn't just my past. It might be the thing that had been chasing him for decades.